And I'm so excited that you're able to join us. I'm going to go ahead and start our recording as well.
Okay.
Are here today. So good afternoon or almost afternoon for those of you who are watching. We are here today with Wisdom Sparks for 316 DC. I'm so excited about our guest today. So we have about another minute. We're counting down until we get started. So this is a great time. Remember, Wisdom Sparks is all about sharing our stories, sharing our faith as a way of sparking ideas and inspiration in people around the world so that we can all be the change that we want to see in our communities. So this is a good time for you to share this live stream. Go ahead and share it on your page, share it with a coworker or a friend, because you just never know who might be inspired by the story. And so today's topic, all of them are important. This one is particularly important because of the crucial time that we're in here in our country. And so we want to make sure as many people as possible can see it so that we can begin to just dialogue together, right? And just really share this space with each other to talk about what's happening in our lives and in our countries. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we have our special guest here. Her name is Hyepin Im, and Hyepin is streaming in early from out of Los Angeles this morning. So we appreciate you for joining us so early in the morning. And today we're going to be talking about a couple of things. Hyepin is leading an amazing organization that I believe you said it's 20 years, right?
That's correct. That's
serve in the community. And so she's leading an awesome work out in Los Angeles that I think we can all learn from. And she's also going to talk about a very important topic that's happening right now that I think all of us are aware of. And that's just the increase in hate crimes and discrimination that Asian Americans are experiencing throughout the country and really throughout the world. So, Hyepin, let's get started. Why don't we just start? Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do at, and the organization is called Faith and Community Empowerment. Is it okay if I call it FACE?
Absolutely.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what you do out at FACE, and then tell us about how did you decide that this was the right role for you?
Sure. Thank you so much again for the invitation, and nice to reconnect. And actually, you know what? The beginning of our organization pretty much aligns with when we connected way back at the Harvard Summer Leadership Institute. Our organization, Faith and Community Empowerment, or FACE, we strive to bring the face of God through service and lift those who are faceless. Now, to put it in practical terms, my parents were in ministry, and they thought they were going to go preach the gospel, save a lot of souls, things like that. And they did do that. But in addition, they really ended up becoming unpaid social workers.
Wow.
So the need in the congregation was so great in terms of needing, help for housing, jobs, etc. And I think actually that call for help is not unfamiliar to really any faith leader, because in essence, I think houses of worship become first responders when people need help. And so back then, I saw them doing pretty good for what they did have, but I saw their struggle still. And in my heart, I always carried this desire, could there be a better way? And I grew up and I saw this model at First AME, where they were doing the very same things that my parents were doing, but because they had partnered with a broader community, they could tap into the resources of government, corporate America, and others. So their offering was 3 million, but they brought in an additional 12 million. Right? Wow, right? So now they could actually pay their workers, and the quality and the quantity of assistance, right, was a day and night difference between what my parents could do and what they could do. I mean, it was from the feeding ministry of 600 families with 2 weeks grocery supply to venture capital. I mean, like small business, housing, all that. So, I mean, long story short, I saw this amazing model where the partners in the broader community had a stake in the church's success. and they were lauding the work of the church in rooms and places where usually God's not mentioned or communities of color are mentioned, etc. And ultimately God got honored and they were invited to the decision-making table.
Wow.
And so for me, our organization is about equipping faith leaders how to build successful partnerships with the broader community, to leverage those resources and to be really impactful in such a way that the world recognizes and values the contribution of churches, right? And welcomes them to the decision-making table. And I have to say, we've had over 800 partners from
Wow.
White House to Fortune 500 companies. And we keep just shining our light. And that's what we teach other faith organizations, how to shine their light. And so that they could turn that resource, that attention into resources. So we have affordable housing, home ownership, down payment assistance, job assistance. We've done mental health work, marriage strengthening work, but we do capacity building through our C2 Leadership Institute and so much more.
You know, that's really awesome because oftentimes people, you know, communities of faith are able to partner with organizations in the community, but sometimes they're not seen as equals. They're seen as almost like charity, right? And so I love the fact that you've been able to elevate the perspective of faith organizations for a lot of community partners to see us as partners that bring value, right? We're not just draining resources by just receiving them, but that faith organizations have something to bring to the table.
Absolutely, right? Whether it's just warm bodies that gets the attention of elected officials in corporate America, but in addition, we have facilities, we have actually people who have a dedicated heart to serve, right? A volunteer pool, as well as expertise, whether you're a janitor or an attorney, people have expertise in whatever area that they touch. And so again, that we are a valued stakeholder that should be invited to the decision-making table.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me a little bit too about, because one of the things we talk a lot about is how the communities of faith can just get outside of their four walls, right? Like how we can begin to touch our communities beyond just the members of our organizations. And so how is it that you bring together the faith community with the outside community? And why do you think that's so important to make that connection?
Well, so as mentioned, the faith community or houses of worship are first responders. People go to them because they trust them. You know, when they're in trouble, right? They trust them, they're accessible, and they're free.
Yeah.
Now, but the thing is that, you know, I went to seminary, you went to seminary. They teach you a lot of great stuff, but they don't necessarily teach on how to partner with the broader community. But you know, one of the two big secrets is that actually, there's so few of us that are out in the broader community that when we do show up and say, I'm interested, and you signal, that actually it catches the attention of elected officials, as well as government agencies in corporate America. And so that's kind of the first step. Through our C2 Leadership Institute, we actually even teach them how to put the word community partnerships right on their website. Right? Just again, to signal to the world that you are interested in partnership opportunities. But the other piece is that I think the other secret is that churches don't know the power that they have. As mentioned, just having warm bodies isn't, you know, especially when elected officials want to run, right? And when elections, you know, a room full of warm bodies is a highly prized asset. Corporate America wants to reach the world. And so if you have access, then you are a highly prized organization. And so you have power to get their attention. And I hope that more faith organizations learn to do that. And, you know, if they're more interested in getting actually real tangible equipping, you know, you should come to our website and look up faith, you know, faithla.org, and just learn more about our training.
You know, it's so interesting because it sounds kind of corny when you say it, but the reality is like churches are made up of people. Like churches are people, and they're people who have everyday jobs, everyday skills. There may be architects, teachers, community organizers, lawyers, all of these different people. And so what an amazing resource for the community is, because not only do you have this group of people who are already established as a team, they're used to working together in these relationships, but also they have that added sort of motivation.
That's right.
They're
Right.
living
Heart,
on
passion.
mission, so you can really trust the skills that they have, but you can also trust their motives in that they're living on mission, they're committed to the work. And so I just love making that connection. And so you talked about C2 leadership a little bit already. And I love when you and I talked how you said, this effort at FACE is really about recognizing that there are some gaps, right? Like we go to seminary or we may be trained within our own communities of faith, but there's some gaps between the sort of the traditional preparation for faith leaders and what's really required in today's environment, right? You almost have to be a jack of all trades, understanding some of these skills that are usually only taught in other environments like business, right? And so what are some of the gaps that you see in terms of faith leaders? And then why is it so important to fill those gaps?
Well, so, I've been at this for 20 years, as mentioned. I think around year 16, I had a crisis moment because even though we've had many successful initiatives, including a $5 million grant from U.S. Department of Labor to help at-risk youth and things of that nature. I mean, I could kind of go on, but each time when I would call the pastors, it felt like I was starting from first base. And I'm like, gosh, God, this doesn't seem right. What am I doing wrong? I thought I was doing it for them, but maybe I'm doing this for myself. And if that's true, then I don't want any of this, right? So there was this kind of almost like second guessing my calling. But I thought about my dad, who was a first generation immigrant, limited English speaker, one-man show with part-time secretary. And I thought, could my dad digest what I had to offer him and navigate to the finish line? And if I was honest, the answer was no. Between what the system requires, whether it's government, corporate America, foundations, whoever, and where not just my dad, but really all pastors, the majority of the pastors, that gap was too huge. Most times, the successful nonprofit leaders, the basic skills, you need government relations skills, fundraising skills, media relations skills, eventing skills, and advocacy skills. And you need to know how to juggle all that. And also you actually need to have relationships, right? Yes. You might have the best proposal, but if you don't know who to send it to, right? What funder to send it to, right? Or you need to advocate, but you don't know what room, who you should be even speaking to. Well, that's kind of futile. So really that they also lack the relationships and also the tools such as media press release, right? Or a fundraising kit, grant template, whatever. So through all that, I learned, gosh, you know what? Instead of being frustrated with pastors, why they're not responding, I realized that they really had not been trained and not equipped. Right. And also in the body of the church, as you mentioned, there's so many great people with great skills, but usually there's not a platform for people like you and me who want to be at the intersection of church and community, right? There's skill sets for like serving in Sunday school, which is very valuable, right? Yes. Or fellowship committee or choir, right? But again, government relations skills, media relations, the average church probably wouldn't even know what to do with you, right? And so there's usually not a committee, and they don't know how to tap into the full skill set and gifting that God has given to the full congregation. So this training was set up to literally, it's like a boot camp. We download the skills, the tools, and the relationship, but more importantly, the mindset. I think, again, pastors have never been trained how to leverage outside resources. We should be wise as the serpent, right? Jesus tells us that. But I think for the most part, we've not learned how to do that as church leaders. And so again, this training does that. It's like a Cinderella pre and post fairy godmother. You will come out on the other side with your new husband, know how to talk to the prince who'll come chasing after you long after you've left, right? But this will be more funders, partners, government officials will come seeking after you to be at your table. and to ask, how can we partner with you? Because you've learned how to shine your light.
Yeah, I love it. I love all of it. And, because oftentimes when we're inviting and trying to get more faith organizations out into the community to be part of the solutions, there's some hesitation, right? Because sometimes people within the churches are intimidated by some of these requirements. But what I hear you saying is that it's okay to not know everything right away, but to just recognize that there's organizations like Faith, like 316, that are out there that are gonna connect you with the skills that you need, but also help you develop relationships. So it's not just the pastor who's trying to learn all of these things, right? But the pastor is leveraging all of the people within the congregation to build the knowledge of the team, so that everyone can add value, right? So
That's
that
exactly right. And you and I, we've been to many trainings.
yeah,
We come home with the best
too many.
intentions, but 99% of the time, I would say, life happens and it all goes out the door. So this training actually provides the inspiration,
Yeah,
but beyond the inspiration, we also provide the technical assistance / mentorship. And the third piece is accountability, right? So you will get to the finish line, like I said, on the other side with actual tangible progress and tools in your hand and relationships to be able to be successful in community and civic engagement, and to really bless the community and to honor God ultimately.
yeah. And this is the perfect time to do it, because I understand some of your offerings are virtual. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Even though you're in LA, we're going to give people the information towards the end, how you can connect with these resources. Don't let a lack of skills or a lack of resources be your excuse anymore, because we're definitely going to be able to connect you with it. So thank you for that. I want to kind of turn the corner a little bit, right? Because as excited as we are about what's happening at FACE, and the organization is so strong and so important, the organization is largely serving a community that is experiencing a very difficult time right now, right?
Yes.
And many of us have seen it on the news, or you may even know someone in the Asian American community that has experienced this uptick in hate crimes. And I have to say, some of the videos and things that I've seen on social media have been, not some, all of them have been so painful to watch. Older Americans just being hit across the head or just tackled for no reason, people called the most hateful words. And we know that the Asian American community is not the only community to experience this, but right now, this is the community that is in crisis. And so we want to talk about that. And so tell us a little bit. I know that you are doing an amazing job, and you've made some presentations to the White House, and you're helping our national officials sort of raise awareness about this issue and help them understand sort of in context, what does this mean? What might some solutions look like? So just take a minute and tell us a little bit, how is what we're seeing really affecting the Asian and American community? And this is based on like the research and work that you've done, but also your personal experience.
Sure. So on one hand, as you mentioned, there's been at least 3,800 accounts that have been reported and documented. And the most recent Atlanta massacre, I think, was kind of a tipping point. In essence, kind of, like for the Black community, again, you have experienced so much pain and suffering and just horrific things in history, and it's still not stopping. But I think that George Floyd was kind of one of those moments of history where you're able to garner people's attention in a different way. And I think for the Asian community, the Atlanta massacre, even though again a whole year of like help, 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 was there, was kind of a turning point, a tipping point for us. And so in that way, I think that for the community, it's almost I don't want to say relief, but of gratitude that we're finally being seen and being heard. And this is the work that I have been doing for the past 20 years, is the fact that during the LA riots, I remember our community being kicked out and crying, particularly out of the $1 billion in property damage, over 40% were incurred by Koreans, over 2,200 business destroyed. And yet, instead of being treated as victims, we were seen as perpetrators. And the fact that, when we were kicked down and crying, we were crying alone. And why weren't there others to cry with us? And so that was kind of a pain point for me. And, really my best mentors have come from the Black community. And, these are really highly respected individuals that I appreciate and care for. And yet, whenever we came to this place about Korean store owners / Black customers, there would be this look of vindictiveness, and it would be like a Dr. Jekyll Hyde. And, it would really pain me because I could see that there was definitely a disconnect. And if I had not respected these individuals, I would just kind of brush off as they're, bad people. But I knew that that wasn't the case. And so, I really struggled to seek understanding of bringing, understanding and to bring our communities together, because I knew in my heart that we were in the same boat.
Yeah.
And so the fact that it's been over 20 years, actually 30 years since the riot, or 29 years, next year will be the 30th, that it's come to this another crisis point in which, again, Asians are victims. I mean, again, throughout history, we have been victims of violence and discrimination and lynching and massacre. But I think during this time, we are feeling very vulnerable, walking on streets, fearing for our parents, fearing for our fellow friends. It's the first time since I've been in this country that I actually fear and tell my husband, be careful. And it's something, I mean, even during the LA riots, because it was more limited to the store owners, that I never felt like, since I didn't work at a store, something that I had to fear and think about. But this is the conversation that we're having every day amongst our friends and, people who are just depressed, just angry, sad. It's a kind of a mixed emotion of everything coming together. But at the same time, I am so grateful that so many allies have reached out. You reached out, right? And it's been like another level of heartwarming solidarity and gratitude. And because I've received these voices, whether it's the calls or the emails, but also on social media, that I've also come to realize that I need to claim my voice to be a voice for other communities. And that is something new. And I'm thinking that is something new for many other Asian Americans. I know that, I've talked to my Black allies, friends, and they share that, why aren't the Asians there for us? And I want to say actually 3 things. One is we have been there, but usually we get cut out of the picture frame. So there's that one group. There's a second group that's just trying to survive. And, I'd be happy to share some of the data points. But if you look closely, contrary to the model minority myth, whether it's an income, criminal justice system, unemployment, housing discrimination, home ownership, mental health, suicide rates, I mean, like I could go on and on, that you'll see that actually a lot of our communities are right there with the Black and Brown community. So there's definitely a large segment. I mean, like over 70% are foreign-born in the Asian community, right? And so again, they're first generation trying to survive in America. And so even they can't even show up for themselves, it's whether they show up for anyone else. And then there's a third group like myself, I think, who have worked long in the community, and yet we are evolving. And I think you see more of us now. And social media has worked too, I think.
Yes.
We don't have to ask for permission and actually be cut out of the picture frame. We could create our own platform, right? Right. But as mentioned, I'm learning, and I'm one of the active ones, But I'm just starting to learn to claim my voice, to be a voice for others. And so I think there is that third group as well. But thank you, Sean, for inviting me to this platform and to be able to share a little bit more on this topic.
You know, one of the things I did, I just tried to type your organizations very badly. Sorry about that, guys. I tried to type. It's tough to multitask, but I will make sure that everyone has Face's website, because there's an amazing the full presentation, I should say one of the recent presentations is there, and it has a ton of statistics in that really helps create context for what's happening, right? And I have to say, I learned a tremendous amount. I was not aware of the impact that the pandemic is having on Asian Americans. As Hyepin has said, the effect of the riots on Asian Americans. There's just so many different areas that this presentation will enlighten, and there's amazing pictures and everything. So we'll make sure that you get that website. Don't go to the one I just typed in there, because that's
actually right under my name on my photo frame is next to my name is our website address too.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we get that. And so everything that you said is just so helpful, because it helps us to better understand, to sort of step into another person's shoes and at least try. It's not possible fully to understand, but it at least gets us a close step or a step closer to understanding the impact. Not just, these aren't just numbers. Sometimes we see these statistics, but we're talking about real people with real families and with real businesses and livelihoods. And so the challenging thing, it's all challenging, but this is happening now, of course, alongside the global pandemic. And it's not just alongside, in many ways, it's connected. A lot of the uptick in crime resulted or started after some very ignorant comments were made about where the virus began. And we know all of those very ignorant things, so we won't repeat them. But it's happening, as well during this last year, during the pandemic. There's been an increase of awareness in the injustice that Black and Brown people have had, right? Race for African Americans in this country, for Native Americans, for so many different racial and ethnic groups has been difficult in the United States. And so, but over the course of the last couple of years, largely because of, I think, a change in perspective, right? As we begin to grapple with life, even through the pandemic, and we began to grapple with our responsibility, like you said, toward each other, lending our voice to each other, but also social media, right? Like, I don't think the world would have known about George Floyd had the young woman not been there recording. And so it's one of the things that I have found difficult in my own conversations with friends who are also community leaders and community advocates, is there's a real struggle, I think, within the Asian community, the Black community, the Latino community, about understanding, how do we deal with our own pain, right? How do we deal with the historic injustices that we've all experienced, and yet step beyond that, or at least look through that lens to be able to empathize with other people? Like, how do we stand in solidarity without giving into that need to sort of compare, right? I think at one point you called it
Oppression Olympics.
Oppression Olympics, right? Where we start saying, well, it's been generations of racial injustice towards Black and Brown people, and this thing against Asians is new, which, as you go and look into it more and look at the website, it's not new. It's very much not new. But how, that's been one of the challenges, and where, as it seems that when you have these different groups of people who have all experienced pain and injustices, that they would be easily aligned, but they're not. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of wrestling with what people consider their truths. And I just want to say to everybody watching that it's okay to wrestle with that. What's not okay is to pretend like it's not there,
Right.
like it's not anything happening and that we don't have feelings towards it. But one of the things that I thought when you and I were talking before that was really helpful for me was you talked about how the fact that each of us as individuals and as racial and ethnic groups have to sort of own our own truth, right? We have to acknowledge our truths, but that we can only fully acknowledge our truths and understand them when we understand them in the larger context, right? Of how does my truth fit within the narrative of a truth that includes other people? And so say a little bit more about that, because that was really helpful to me to think about truth within context and what that
Sure,
means.
sure. So, as you mentioned, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room, and to just jump to something else doesn't help us to assess the situation correctly or holistically, and to be able to come to the best solutions correct as well. And so, I think about, as mentioned earlier, you know, the tension between Korean store owners and Black customers. Again, that's very personal to me, not because I own a liquor store, although my husband's family did, but more that that's an area that it becomes very explosive whenever tensions arise, whenever protests arise, etc. And so it's kind of raw, and it's something that I've sought really to, again, seek understanding. And one of the things that I came to realize, and I really pray to God for understanding, is that there's definitely myths or narratives that we tell of one another that puts each other in the category of evil. And so if someone is evil, and then, if you do evil on evil, or you do violence on evil, actually you're fighting good, right?
Right.
And I think that is where, unfortunately, we're not all evil. We are all children of God, and we, each of our communities, are struggling through our own journey of life. And especially living in America, there is, again, I do want to acknowledge that there is this history or white supremacy that has, in essence, put us on the bottom fighting for crumbs. So there is an acknowledgement of that, but they've set the rules, right? But then on a day-to-day life, we are interacting with one another that causes pain for one another. And
Yeah.
instead of building solidarity, we are, again, inflicting pain for each other. And so related to the store owner, I've heard stories of, and I asked, what is it that you hear about the Korean community, the Korean store community? And some of them are like, they're greedy. They've been given special loans that the Black community doesn't get. And so they really have stolen the business opportunity from the Black community. They're selling bad goods. They're targeting the Black community, and they should be more generous. They should give more, hire more, etc. And they're really outsiders, right? They don't belong in our community, and they're taking goods, money out of from the Black community, and out to their community. But I just want to say, like, my father-in-law was somewhat of a successful businessman in Korea. He was one of 3 business owners that introduced chewing gum to Korea. The other 2 have become global companies. But family problems happened. He came to America, and he ended up working as a janitor because he has a high language barrier, like so many others. But during that time period, he received, I believe it was $10,000 or $20,000 for referring a client to an immigration attorney. So that served as his seed money. But otherwise, I would say for most Koreans, we are highly educated in terms of, like, 3rd highest in terms of bachelor's degree. They come to America thinking this is the American dream, but they're stuck in a minimum wage job. And they're going, this is not why I came to America, right? And so they really skimp and save to see what they could afford in terms of starting a business. And business ownership is not an aspiration for the Korean community. It's more as a default from lack of other options. They come here to teach their kids, get them educated so they could become doctors, engineers, and lawyers, right? Or at least that's their definition of success, right? But so again, with my father-in-law, that money was not enough to buy a business, but they found a store owner that would carry the loan and a Korean bank that would give them the loan. And studies have shown that there's more Asian-owned businesses when there's Asian-owned banks nearby. So Asians also face the same kind of discrimination in terms of getting loans. And so Asians had to figure out how to get help for themselves because they weren't going to get the help, right? So anyway, long story short, he went into this business and he was highly leveraged, under-resourced. And typically it takes 2 people, 2 shifts to run these stores. Well, he didn't have the money, so he took on the 2 shifts, and that's a 16-hour day, and used family members, right, to help run the business. And it's my husband after graduation from high school, he went to the store, but the distance from because of the long hours to drive home and come back was too much. So there was an attachment or house next to the store. So my father-in-law for 3 years, right, did not go home Monday through Friday.
Wow.
To make this work, right? And my husband actually calculated his wages in terms of the hours and everything. He was working for less than minimum wage. And so that was kind of the reality. And that's kind of a reality for many people, that they don't have money even to go on vacation or holiday. It's also a very dangerous job. It's the second most highest workplace homicide victim rate. So number 1 is taxi driver, right? Being killed on your job, right? And then convenience store employees. So, again, how many people would say, I love that job, it's guaranteed that I'm going to get held up at a gunpoint and maybe get killed, right? So again, these store owners are also struggling too. And again, they're not wholesalers. Their wholesale is Costco. And so, if the margins were there, I would say the bigger stores will be there to take the profit, but it doesn't work. And again, these store owners are putting their life on the line. They're living there longer than the average resident. And so in that way, they have as much to gain in terms of the community advancing, at minimum increased revenue and a safer workplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've shared this with you, but if I need someone to jump and they refuse, I wouldn't be happy with them. But if I learn that actually they're in a wheelchair, something will shift inside, for sure, right? But it still doesn't take away my need for them to jump. But now that I know that they're in a wheelchair, my approach, right, to my solution will be very different. Yelling at them, screaming at them is stupid and futile, right? At minimum, I could, build a ramp or throw them over my shoulder and I jump or something like that, right? So in the same way, I think, for especially communities of color where we've been pitted against one another, if we can open our eyes to see the truth that we're all in the same economic wheelchairs, right? But at the same time, we also have that God-given light.
Yeah.
And so if we could then bring our voices, bring our gifts, and come in solidarity and unity, right? I think the pie will become so much bigger. And again, assessing the problem correctly, right? Or looking at it more holistically, maybe. And so if instead of looking at the store owner as a perpetrator, maybe to say, okay, you know what, they're struggling, but they're a fellow stakeholder in the community. They're living there longer than the average resident. They're putting their life on the line to provide a service that others are not even willing to do so. How can we come along? What do they need? Right? Because they're working in a very highly traumatized environment where they're being held up at gunpoint, assaulted, receiving a lot of even verbal racist assaults, being pounded, all the things that you're seeing right now is very much a reality for store owners. I mean, from way back when, right? But instead to say, one of the programs that we run is the on-the-job job training site. And so the pay comes from government, but we provide the training for the worker. and so that they could build skill sets. So why don't we put some workers, right, at the stores so the local people could get trained, get job, right? And they can learn about running a business. And for the business owner, they'll get at minimum at least one extra worker or two extra worker,
Yes.
right? And they'll be English speakers, and and maybe even that worker will kind of see what happens on the inside and maybe have some empathy and could be a great ambassador to the broader community to say, hold on, let's build some peace here, right? It's kind of a very different approach to existing challenges and tensions by being able to look at that situation with new set of eyes.
Yes. And and we have, the only way we can really do that, like, we know our truth, we understand our own pain, we know what we're experiencing on a daily basis, but the only way to really understand and know the experiences of someone else is to ask them, right? Like, even as you were talking, I just heard you just refuted so many myths that I've heard in my community so many times. For example, people often think, like, one of the things you said is that becoming a business owner isn't like the main goal of Asian Americans who come to this country. But oftentimes in the Black communities, we say, well, Asians are coming and they're just taking up every store. Their goal is to take over and own all the stores. But what I hear you saying is that's a backup plan, because often the economics are not there to be able to make other options. And another one that you said is, oftentimes store owners are hiring family members and friends because
hiring, not hiring, free labor.
Right, that's what I was going to say, right? Because, well, they're employing because the economy, the finances aren't there to be able to hire. But yes, oftentimes in other communities, when we're looking from the outside through myths, we see, well, they're discriminating. Why is it that they're only hiring their own, right? And so this has been so helpful for me, and I hope for other people, because what I hear is that we do not have to give up our truth. We don't have to minimize our own pain to be able to understand the experience of somebody else. But what we are asking is that when we're acknowledging our own truth, that we don't use that pain and our truth to create the truth for somebody else, that we don't create myths for other people, but that we ask people their story. We take the time to truly understand what another person's experience is, because when we do, then we can identify what the real problem is that needs to be addressed. When we're wasting our time creating myths about each other, we're fighting each other, yes, and we're missing what the real problem is. The real problem is not enough resources to, that are being shared with different groups, right? They're being monopolized by one group, while these groups over here are fighting over crumbs, not even understanding the real.
Even if it's being monopolized by another group, that by us coming together to acknowledge and lift up each other's gifts and to come together, we could create new wealth.
Yes.
I think like the Jewish community, they were left out. They went and created Hollywood, right? They went and created the attorney firms, right? Because again, the system wouldn't allow them, right? And I think even for the Korean community right now with BTS, I never thought Koreans would be like considered like great singers. Korean male would be sexy.
My daughter's favorites.
All those things that for so long, living in America as an Asian, I've been told, right? These labels have been put on us. And so then I put it on, my fellow Asian men, although I finally married a Korean guy and, got to see the truth. But my point is that Asian men are looked upon as nerds and, and I always thought Korean, at least original TV shows, they were terrible with movies and dancing. It was really like painful for me to see it. And so for BTS and like all this stuff to come into fruition, like I never imagined. And so again, I feel like we should definitely attack and address the systemic racism in this country. But at the same time, we should seek to learn and appreciate our God-given light and be able to help one another to create those platforms where our lights could shine. Right? Because power doesn't really relinquish at all. But I think that when we shine our light, that attracts opportunities. I keep thinking of Susan Boyle.
Yes.
You know what? She was that frumpy old lady that came on to Britain's Got Talent. And you know what? From the audience to the judges, they totally dissed her. They definitely did not think she was, I mean, they were so mean. I would say mean, right? But, on that stage, when she was given that opportunity to open and sing, right? That was a very defining, transformative moment in which the world could now appreciate, see her God-given light, right? And from that moment, she was able to bless the world and in turn be blessed. And I
Yes.
think, again, for each one of us, I feel like we are treated like Susan Boyles of the world. And we think of ourselves as Susan Boyles of the world, right? Before she gets on that stage and opens and sings, right? But really, again, we all have that God-given light. And I think, to become curious of each other's communities, instead of sticking with the labels or myths or narratives that we have in our heads of others, to say, I wonder what God-given light that God has given them.
Yes.
And how can we come alongside, right? And what is that platform where I could see their light? And maybe I could be a vehicle, and for one another, right? And for each other's community and our own communities. I think that's kind of, again, a way to get out of this out of this tension and this hate. Hate any color. Hate in any color is hate. Sinful is evil. It's not transformative.
Right. And to remember who the real enemy is, right? The real enemy is hate, it's racism, it's not white people or any one particular group, right? So we're not fighting against each other, we're fighting against that sin that is racism, that same sin that manifests itself as sexism or classism, all of these different isms. And when we do that, when we stop fighting each other, then we can truly see what these real problems are and use, like you said, the light that we have within to be able to make a difference. So I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry we're running out of time. I'm so glad that we've had the opportunity to have this, and we're just touching like the tip of the iceberg.
We
are deep-seated issues that are going to take a ton of conversations around boardroom tables, around living room, kitchen tables, to having these conversations with our children, within our families, within our organizations, and within our churches, right? Talking about racism, sexism, all these different things within our congregations is so important so that we can identify if there's anything within ourselves that's dimming that light for us to be able to shine that light out into the world. So as we close and wrap up, Wisdom Sparks, again, it's about sharing our stories each week from people all over. Today we have Hyepin Im from FACE, which is Faith and Community Empowerment. They're out of Los Angeles. We're going to make sure we get you their contact information. And we're talking about, they provide particular support and services to lots of different faith communities, especially around building the skills and empowering faith organizations to have these partnerships. But also providing a particular support and service to Asian Americans as well. And so as we close, Hyepin, any lasting or closing words for people who may be watching that might inspire them?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is that never get discouraged. And I think, again, for the Asian American community, we feel like we are, Israelites crying out to God, right? All these years, the first Asian came to America in the 1500s. And we were legislated out in populating this country. But finally, our day has come. And one of the areas that hurts me is that I'm in so many rooms and I hear Black, brown, which is great for the Black, brown community, because I feel like there has been history of tension there, but to be able to come together. But over and over again, the Asian community has continued to be omitted or left out in that solidarity, as well as policies and resources. And we've even advocated to President Biden. Even COVID-19, as you mentioned in our PowerPoint that you could go see on our website, we have been disproportionate impacted, whether it's death, infection rates, et cetera, and racism. And the other day, President Biden, I was in a room where he was presenting and he talked about COVID-19 and he said, Black, brown, and then Asian Pacific Islander. It took a little struggle for him to get there. I mean, he went from Asian American and there was like a pause, like he was trying to figure it out. And then he said AAPI and then there was a pause. And then he finally said Asian Pacific Islander. But that was kind of a moment of at least a momentary joy. I know that it's not permanent, but I really seek the solidarity from our Black and brown community, because we're right there with you. We've been there with you in the struggles, in the fights. We are not the enemy. And again, we are all on the same team. So I just want to extend that invite to walk together in this country, in this fight.
Yeah. Awesome. So thanks again for joining us, everyone. This has been Wisdom Sparks this week with Hyepin Im. We're going to go ahead and end our live stream, but